What's up, everybody? You're listening to Hey Man, the advice podcast for men. I'm Sam Graham-Felsen.
I'm Avi Klein.
I'm a novelist, Avi's a therapist, and we're here to answer your questions and hopefully get a few of our own questions answered as well. Our guest this week is Ali Sethi. Ali is a legitimate rock star in Pakistan and India. He has millions of views for his videos. He has hundreds of thousands of loyal fans. He's also a novelist and a journalist and an all-around brilliant thinker and person. Thanks. For people who aren't already huge fans of you and your work, just tell us where you grew up and just what that environment was like for you as a kid.
So I grew up in Lahore in Pakistan in the early 1990s. So I'm a Pakistani millennial. And then I came away to America to study. I went to Harvard, like you, Sam.
Not like
I'm
me.
looking at Avi,
No.
like, no.
No, you can just tell by looking at me.
You're like, I had a genuinely charmed life. So I went to Harvard, where I majored in South Asian studies and took a bunch of creative writing courses, which is what I wanted to do. Published a novel right out of college. Was a sort of correspondent for the New York Times op-ed page for a few years while I went back to Pakistan, where there was a lot of turmoil at that time. And have also done, alongside all of these literary activities, a formal apprenticeship in classical Indian, South Asian singing and music making, which has lasted about a good 15 years, taken 15 years of my life. And now I live a kind of happily improvised life in which I perform, I record, I compose music, I produce music, I curate concerts, musical segments for art fairs. I write about music, I write about literature, I lecture about literature and music. And what I'm happy to report is that actually those two things that at a certain point in my life used to feel very separate, music and literature, now feel kind of welded at the hip.
So, yes, Ali and I went to college together, although we didn't actually become friends until after college, where we both worked at The Nation, a political journal in New York City. But we became friends then, and I will say though that like Ali is one of the more intellectually serious, intellectually rigorous people I've ever met. And Ali, one thing that just really struck me when you made this transition into really doing more music, I have to say, like, there was a part of me that was almost jealous because I felt like we're both writers, we're both novelists, but novelists spend so much time in their head, so much time intellectualizing things, so much time thinking. And music just seems like something that's just like a domain so much more of feeling, and it's such a more visceral domain. And I just wonder, like, what's that been like for you and again, it's not like you've abandoned your writing or you've abandoned intellectual life. You're still doing that stuff, but music is the lifeblood of your life at this point. I think it's fair to say. And what's that been like to go from the domain of like the thinking mind to just like the feeling space for you?
It's been a revelation, among other things. The culture that I come from has been historically suspicious of intellectualization. Even the great metaphysical poets of, the Sufi tradition or of the Hindu Bhakti tradition, who have created these really sophisticated literatures that are full of philosophical insight and emotional insight, have kind of reserved a special scorn for the intellectualizers or those who live exclusively in the realm of the mind.
Is that considered effeminate?
I don't think it's considered effeminate. In fact, it's considered toxic masculine, if anything,
interesting.
right? So the idea that there is this in the realm of poetry and music and the arts, and then also by extension in the realm of administration, kingship, citizenship, and religion and devotion and worship. There's this idea that scholars and clerics, right, who are the keepers of knowledge, or scribes, who later then become novelists in the Western tradition, right? The idea that those who deal only in knowledge tend to make abstract what is really only knowable through experience.
Mm-hmm.
So that idea is something that I grew up with, but then having gone to a place like Harvard, where of course everything in the liberal arts education, I don't know what it's like now, but certainly, some 10 years ago when I was there as an undergraduate, the art of writing a paper, what was it? You scanned a book, in like 5 days and then wrote a paper about it. And you could choose a topic of your choice to write that paper on. And you had to, quote unquote, make an argument, right? And what I found difficult at first was making an argument. What is it to make an argument? Just coming to terms with that idea that you had to kind of go at it.
Mm-hmm.
That the text was external to you, and then you had to go at it, and you had to conquer it in some way, or produce knowledge, as people said. Whereas my own instinctive sort of way of dealing with an encounter with a beautiful work of literature, or even a troubling work of literature, or a problematic one, would be to kind of express my experience of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is not necessarily in the realm of making an argument. It doesn't get expressed as an argument. It may get expressed as an appreciation, or it may be expressed as, a journal or an account. I think these things are now more possible, perhaps thanks to social media. I now see a lot of literary reviews, etc., being written in the first person in the New York Times. It was not possible 12 years ago, really, where you were supposed to assume this detached, authoritative, regardless of who you were or what your relationship to the text was or whatever. So I think for music allowed me to get out of that quote-unquote headspace. There's a beautiful couplet from the Urdu that my teacher used to recite to me. In Urdu it says, "Aql ke madrase se ut, ishq ke main kade mein aa," which means get up from the madrasa of learning, right? Exit the library and step into the tavern of love, right? So seek intoxication, because intoxication, while it's ostensibly a zone where you lose control, actually may be a better way of experiencing and entering into knowledge.
It's something that we talk about a lot is just, I don't know, for Sam and I at least, there's like a kind of vulnerability that we struggle with not just like expressing bad feelings, but also like desire and wanting, and that there's something much more comfortable about being maybe like detached and up here and thinking about it versus doing it. And I don't know, that's what I'm hearing.
I struggle with that a lot, actually, myself. Constantly, my teacher is saying to me, sing it with feeling, with more feeling. They use this word, dard, sing it with dard, say it with dard. And dard literally would translate as pain, but actually it's much more beautiful and supple than pain. Dard encompasses feeling of all kind, right? So let the feeling show. And I think vulnerability is very much a part of that. And, I think that's the intellectual side of me still going at it with this kind of, I'm constructing something.
It's very hard for me. It's like I can have feelings about ideas, like, oh, what a beautiful way to frame it. And then that moves me instead of just being moved in the first place.
Sure. Yeah.
That's
I
my
think
life struggle.
I'm like that too.
Yeah.
That's my life struggle.
So tell us a little bit about the music you've been making lately in particular.
Well, so I've trained in a genre of Indian classical and devotional music called khayal, which is from the Arabic word takhayyul. Khayal in contemporary language means thought or idea. When you say in Urdu, mera khayal hai, you can literally begin a sentence with, I think that, this is called khayal. And I think it has to do with improvisation, with imagination, with expressing your innermost, feelings. It's on the one hand very structured because there are all these rule-bound melodic passages, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, that you have to kind of exercise with and kind of just do the motions, with these things as you're practicing and you're learning. But what you end up acquiring is a kind of algorithmic sort of sense for how to create melody and how to play with melody and how to create counter melodies and also rhythms and counter rhythms. So that is really what it is. And it's not a notated music. It's not written down, which makes it especially difficult to access. You have to undertake an apprenticeship with a master or a maestra, which is what I did, and spend years, perhaps decades, just, working in this very intimate situation. So I did that. I have done that, continue to do it. It's been, about 15 years. And now at the end of these 15 years, I find I'm in a place where I can use those algorithmic sort of techniques for making melodies, drawing on traditional melodies that themselves come from a very cosmopolitan encounter that happened in North India all through what Europe was the Middle Ages, right? So like I would say around from the 11th century till about all the way to the 19th century. For those 800 years, there were Turks, Persians, Central Asians, Indian, Hindus, South Indians collaborating, exchanging dialogues, artifacts, ideas, languages, and the music and the poetry that expressed them is still performed in South Asia. So what I ended up kind of connecting with was this medieval or traditional culture that still speaks a kind of contemporary language in South Asia. So the music that I've started to make now is, at least I hope it is, simultaneously traditional and contemporary. And this is something that I've always wanted to do, and I guess we could talk about it, is as a dissenting, non-conformist in many ways person growing up in a Muslim society and then living in America, coming to America at a time when everything Muslim is suspect and under a lot of scrutiny.
You came here right after 9/11.
I did. And now I live between America and Pakistan. The desire to reconcile seeming opposites has always been something, it's been like a kind of mission that I've carried within me, I suppose because my parents are kind of those figures as well in Pakistan. My parents are, maybe you can say.
Well, I actually want to talk about your parents in the advice section because I think it's relevant. But Avi's parents are both prominent journalists and democracy activists. Sorry, Ali's parents.
Yeah, not mine.
Avi's parents are not prominent democracy activists. But they're both, and they have throughout their careers and lives been targeted by the government and live in a fairly precarious situation because of the stakes that they've taken, the moral stance that they've taken. And so Ali grew up in that environment. And I want to save the discussion for the advice question because I think it's highly relevant. So we'll get back to that.
Okay, sure.
But certainly you grew up in a political family, in a dissident family. So that has come into the work that you do as a musician.
Absolutely. And the songs that I'm making now kind of are protest pieces in their own way, but they refuse to surrender the elements of beauty, play, ambiguity, metaphor, which I think I've been able to kind of enter into via my training in music and poetry.
One of the things I was curious about, I was listening to your music and watching your videos in preparation for meeting you, and I had that. I do like to listen to a fair amount of music that's made outside of the States, but my encounter with it is, as a New Yorker, and I don't always have like the aesthetic criteria that are clear to me. So I'm wondering, I could use some help in entering your music, and I wonder one, like, who are people in the States maybe that you might think of as who are either inspirational or who are doing something that feels analogous to what, like, how might I experience that here in the way that someone in Pakistan would experience what you're doing?
Well, to be honest, I think currently, and I think I'm moving more towards a sort of culturally ambiguous direction now, but the music I've made thus far is really in some ways a kind of homage to the tradition that I'm coming out of and coming from. And so the new songs, I've put out about 4 new songs in the last 4 months, and they've all been produced by Noah Georgeson, who's a producer in Los Angeles. And he made the title track for Narcos, which is the Netflix show. And that's how I discovered him, is because I was in a store in London some 5 years ago, and I heard something and Shazammed it. And I was like, this is the sound I want from my music. And it was a song sung by the guy who sang the Narcos soundtrack, Rodrigo Amarante. And then I went and downloaded Rodrigo Amarante's entire record, and then just spent about 2 years, like, kind of, cuddling it and hugging it, and felt that particular sensibility, which was simultaneously felt contemporary and kind of hipster and kind of, sort of deliberately artisanal in a time when everything is over digitized and kind of, conformist. It also felt like something from the global south. Rodrigo is Brazilian and now lives, I think, in America or between America and Brazil. So that's, I think, the kind of sound. And then, I listen to a lot of Sufjan Stevens, who I've been listening to lately, and I love his music. I love the sort of element of storytelling and kind of this, tentatively accessed memory that's like then strung along these like really gorgeous ukuleles and guitars. It's very sort of delicate but somehow very powerful, precisely because it eschews like drums and beat and all the rest of that. So I'm drawn to a lot of that stuff, I think. But I would say that my music is I think I'm still telling stories, really. That's what I'm doing. If you look at the videos and if you listen to the music, there is an element of dramatic sort of tension being raised and then resolved in some way. So I think maybe approach them like vignettes from another culture.
So right now, India and Pakistan seem to be on the brink. Although it's funny, that phrase "on the brink," the New York Review of Books, like every 2 years has an article, Pakistan and India on the brink.
It should be a podcast all by itself,
on the brink.
On the brink.
But you grew up, ever since the partition, there's been sort of tension and potential war, right? And in fact, when I came to visit your family in Lahore, we took a little trip to the border of Pakistan and India, where they every day have a sort of on one side of the fence, the Pakistani sort of patriots all celebrate their nuclear weapons, and then on the other side of the fence, the Indian patriots celebrate their nuclear weapons, and it's this kind of dramatized bravado. Anyway, obviously you could talk to us for years about what it was like growing up in an environment like that. But some of the music you've been making now is specifically kind of
addressed to that.
A gesture towards peace on some level, right?
Yeah.
And
I feel like there's two kinds of ways of addressing a song to peace. One is making like a no war, yes peace,
like
which
also
kinda. Which also feels a little bit like sort of presumptuous and arrogant to me. That idea of like, we're done with war, like we want peace, and we're men, so we want peace. So because if men can want peace, then like women just should have it, It's that kind of like, I feel it is still also like toxic masculine, like it's performing itself to its own toxic masculinity. I feel that the kind of music that I'm doing, and this is in no way meant to praise my efforts, but it's just a way to sort of clarify the intention, which I think is different. One of the things, I was saying this to somebody, an interviewer yesterday, in fact, that I think of when I think of my journey into music, my decision, as it were, to kind of seek the music or to connect with the music or with this tradition, was that when I was an undergraduate, I remember I was doing a course on modern South Asian history that was in fact taught by the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. And one of the TAs said to me, I was writing a paper for her, and I was saying, well, there are feminists and Marxists and activists and human rights activists in Pakistan, and like why are we not like counting their work when we think of? And she said, well, we're looking at broad trends, and we're looking at and I was like, but why doesn't this count? And she said to me, I remember, she said, that's because secularist intellectuals don't have constituencies in Pakistan. Right? And that really kind of just like, it was like a dagger to my heart. And I was like, well, but I also intuitively kind of know that secularist intellectuals, while they may have audiences, they don't have the constituencies that right-wingers have, And I mean, we see a lot of that in America today. We see how easy it is to undermine a quote-unquote liberal politician or a liberal commentator, or to quote-unquote call out a liberal, and how and often by self-proclaimed liberals themselves, right? And how difficult it is to dislodge, groper, assaulter, rapist, etc., who is avowedly, all of those things. And I thought that I immediately wondered to myself, who are the people who have those constituencies in South Asia, in my culture? Like, secularizing voices, voices that, and by secularizing, I don't mean irreligious. I mean those who insist on multiple perspectives, those who insist.
Cosmopolitans.
It's all involved in, I think, cosmopolitanism, the multi-nature of the universe, right? And I thought, oh, they're the Sufis, they're the mystics, they're the ones who, create or insist on multiplicity as a way of accessing the ultimate oneness. The idea that diversity is proof of unity, and diversity is the only way to kind of, insist on a very truthful idea of oneness. It's an idea that you find a lot in Jewish mysticism as well. So I sought that out, and the music and the poetry that I have been studying gave that to me in volumes and volumes. Sufi masters have created vast bodies of work that are designed to arouse in people and to create in people appetites for multiplicity, right? Deliberately ungendered poems, right? Which the Urdu language and the Punjabi language beautifully accommodate. Mixing imagery from Hindu mythology and Islamic theology.
Just let me stop you. What is an ungendered like? How does that even work? Is there a neutral pronoun in Urdu? Is that what you're saying? There's like a neutral pronoun?
Yeah,
we don't have a neutral. I mean, actually, now we do have neutral pronouns in America.
Now you do.
Now we have they, but we didn't have
exactly. We have a they. There you go. There's a they.
We've
had a they for like 1,000 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. There you go. I never thought of that. This is beautiful. This is wonderful. This is a whole other like thing.
So these poems are basically using
they poems.
They.
Absolutely.
They okay.
And they, by the way, which, because it's they, can be singular or plural, right? Can be masculine or feminine or neither, which means it can be a person, right? It could be a society that you're addressing, a collective that you're addressing. The Marxist variation on the Sufi poetries then, or the socialist versions of it in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, also used this they to address, an ostensible community of fellow travelers.
Did people identify as they who were? I mean, the poets were using this terminology, but were there people going around saying, I don't identify as a man or a woman? Or
yes, there were people who, in fact, the great Sufi poet Bulle Shah, the great Sufi poet Shah Hussain, a bunch of great, interesting Sufi poets. I'm thinking of the woman poet Mirabai, the Bhakti poet. They have often even said in the midst of their poems, I am beyond gender.
Right.
And Bulle Shah, in fact, famously, Bulle Shah was the 18th century Punjabi Sufi poet, whose poetry is sung to this day all over the subcontinent in the diaspora, famously dressed up as a woman and wore sort of dancing bells and danced in the street to kind of express love for his way of living.
So obviously the stereotype in America of Muslim patriarchal societies is that,
right.
Or of Muslim societies is that they're heavily patriarchal, the most sort of toxically masculine, of all in some ways, and I think obviously it's not widely known. I would say it's not even minorly known in America that there is this tradition of genderlessness and this kind of like super.
Somehow, I don't think that would really make the major critics of Islam feel any better.
Right, of course not.
Right.
But the thing I'm curious about is like in your for our listeners, they should realize like Ali is like a rock star in Pakistan and
Should have
India
led
and
with
throughout
that,
South Asia, and like when like it's even when he leaves our studio, he'll walk down the street, and if there's a Pakistani person walking down the street, they'll ask him for selfies, or an Indian person. Like it's so you get huge audiences, and I'm curious, like first of all, like how much awareness is there of this kind of like very kind of advanced gender politics that has been a part of your culture and tradition for hundreds of years? How much awareness is there now in Pakistan of that, and how much is your work like bringing about awareness of that?
I was gonna come to that. This is it. I think what's interesting is that, as I learned in Professor Ali Asani's course at Harvard, which was Understanding Muslim Cultures and Societies, the bulk of Muslim experience, quote unquote, of the divine or of religion or of faith has happened through the arts, right? By the bulk, we mean both in terms of the majority of Muslims at any given period. So the largest Muslim populations, by the way, don't live in the Middle East, right? This is also something a lot of Americans are surprised to hear, that it's not sort of Muslims roaming around in the sands.
It's South Asia.
It's South Asia and Indonesia, absolutely. Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Indonesia, Malaysia together make up the bulk of what we think of as the Muslim world. Not Saudi Arabia, not the United Arab Emirates, not Qatar, not Iran. And also then through history, what we know of, what we think of as Saudi Arabia is less than 100 years old, right? As a formation, as a place. What we think of as the United Arab Emirates is also a recent, what we think of as Pakistan is a 72 or 73-year-old nation. And I think in the pre-national and then pre-colonial periods, there were thriving cultures and thriving critical cultures around these traditions of sort of gender diversity, of religious pluralism. This whole aesthetic kind of movement was known and celebrated by historians, by kings, by rebel princes and princesses who are also often poets and patrons of music in these traditions, by mendicants, by traders, so there was I would say something like a civil society around this sort of tradition. I think what's happened in the colonial and then in the post-colonial phases is that the sort of language of the nation state, right, which has tended to be, mostly because it's coming out of a colonial encounter, which is a violent encounter, and it's tended to privilege narrow, legalistic, exclusionary, because a lot of these nation states were fashioned by carving up territories, right? So it was always about borders. I am what I am not, that you define yourself against this perceived other. I mean, so much of the Pakistani nation states narrative has been not India. How do we differentiate ourselves from India to justify, I don't know, military expenditure or whatever. So I think we've lost, to answer your question, that kind of legitimacy, or that license that this poetic and musical culture used to have, even though people still continue to access it through their quote unquote, entertainment or culture or devotional life. So in every wedding procession, in every funeral procession, in every religious ritual or rite, you will encounter these metaphors and these things. And people who otherwise on the street or in an interview will say to you, "Oh yeah, we believe in punishment for adultery, and anybody who deviates from the norm of Sunni religion, Orthodox religion, should be stopped from having a perspective, voice, etc." Will the next minute be sort of undulating in this gathering of
It's very sort of demarcated.
Yeah. So I think for me to bring this back into kind of a conversation, what I do during my concerts is, and also in my music videos, is I perform the piece, but I also kind of make an attempt to curate it in a way that I hope and intend will stimulate conversation around these metaphors and lead people to then make connections between things that should not belong together. And that's kind of what happened with my recent music video, Chandni Raat, which means it's a moonlit night. It's a piece that I wrote and composed, and I shot the video in Lahore. And it's a ghazal, which is a traditional, initially Arabic poetic genre of rhyming couplets that are full of these metaphors. And sort of it uses this refrain. So it goes like, "This moonlit night's been a long time coming. The words on my tongue have been a long time coming." So a long time coming is the refrain that kind of stacks up all the verses. We deliberately shot a video of it that was non-literal. We shot a video actually in a dilapidated greenhouse in Lahore, which looks like a bombed shelter, or like a.
It feels like it's out of World War II.
It does, right?
Yeah.
Or like out of World War II, or like some kind of camp or some kind of refugee space, or it's a greenhouse in Punjab University. It's a dilapidated greenhouse in Lahore. Yeah. So, and we deliberately filled it up with people who are non-actors, just residents of Lahore, which include somebody from the extremely persecuted ethnic Hazara minority, she's an art student studying in the National College of Arts, a Chinese immigrant to Pakistan, a trans woman who lives in Lahore. We had a moment with these two boys who kind of touch each other tenderly, which we kind of didn't spell out what the nature of their relationship was, but I think a lot of people sort of perceived and understood that it was a gesture towards same-sex love. Yeah. And we also had, two older men sitting together, etc. And part of the idea was that the refrain, right, the idea that a long time coming, this moonlit night has been a long time coming, can be a metaphor for all of these relationships. Because a moonlit night is, a half visible, a state of like half light, right? So it allows you, in a romantic sense, to kind of reveal things and express things that are otherwise forbidden or that are otherwise not visible. And what's so interesting is that we released it on, I think, the 10th of February or 11th of February, and 3 days later, there was an incident on the India-Pakistan border, and we were on the verge of war, India and Pakistan. And virtually all the comments that I got under the video were like, "This is so timely. This is about India and Pakistan. This is about how we need to come together through these." And yet there was no explicit mention of India and Pakistan in that video. But to this day, now it's been 4 months, the video has like 1 million views. And it's because people have. So this is the power of that tradition, is that when you teach people how to enter into metaphors, right, they learn to kind of exult in shared spaces. A metaphor is a shared space by its very nature, right? Because it's saying it could mean this thing or it could mean that thing. You're using one image to convey another image. And so it opens up this kind of room for diversity, which I think is very, very, it feels very old-fashioned to people, but actually it's in some ways equipment for living in our world right now.
We're going to get to the advice question. I just have one more just hyper general question about your impressions of living in the United States versus Pakistan in terms of gender. One thing that I noticed when I went to Pakistan, and not just in Pakistan, but in other parts of the global South and the East, is that men who may or may not be gay hold hands walking down the street. And that's something that just you literally never see two men, unless they're in a relationship, holding hands in the United States.
How about two men like touching each other?
Yeah,
outside of like slapping each other on the back.
right,
And,
right. It's a quick tap, right? A quick, maybe in the locker room a butt slap, right?
Right.
But I'm just curious, like,
Yeah.
do you? What are the obviously toxic masculinity exists in both places, but what are the what are some of the like differences that you've experienced personally about like
I think
what it's
that-
like to be a man here versus there? Do you feel freer like to express feelings in one place versus
It's
the
interesting. It's a mixture of things, and I would not want to present a grand theory of anything because I haven't made one, but I do think that Pakistan, for example, is someone described it to me as a homosocial culture, right? This is a place where men will hold hands and walk on the street together, where they will kiss each other on the cheek, where they will, sort of cuddle and kind of lie down in parks together and kind of, flake off the dandruff from one another's like shoulders. Yeah.
That's so sweet.
And it's very sweet, and give each other massages in the park and like, sit around together. And that's in some ways really kind of beautiful and wonderful, especially when, I grew up with that on view, but then also watching, say, a sitcom like Friends, in which Joey and Ross got awkward every time they touched each other. So that used to feel, when you grow up with something, you just assume it's the nature of things and it's true, right? But like now that I think about it, what signal was that sending out to the world, And I think, we need to apply a revisionist sort of perspective to a lot of the pop culture that we grew up with. But I also think that at some level, that sort of extremely comfortable sort of display of male affection, or male, or as we say, male to male affection in a place like Pakistan or India or Afghanistan or etc. I think it is linked to, I would not say because of or a result of, but I think it is related to the stigma or taboo that surrounds public displays of affection between men and women. Women will also publicly sort of caress one another in Pakistan and sort of hug each other and sort of walk around together. But I think if a man and a woman were to hold hands in Pakistan, I think there would be hell to pay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's so.
So it's a qualified sort of praise.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want it to come down to needing to ban affection between different genders to allow men to hold hands. But I was just like imagining, like, I wonder if any time in our lifetime, like in America, it will be culturally acceptable for men who are friends to just like hold hands and touch each other, and who knows. Anyway, let's dive into the advice question.
All right. Hey, man. So my problem concerns my friends from college. We were housed together freshman year, and none of us had a lot in common. But I actually loved the fact that we all had different personality types and interests and values. I grew close to them and still keep in close touch with most of them. But over a decade since we've graduated, these differences, especially the differences in values, have come to grate on me. For one, while I pursued a career in nonprofit social justice work, most of them went into corporate and tech careers. I make way less money than they do, and when we meet up for dinner, they always choose expensive places that I can't really afford. They see themselves as carefree and fun-loving and never seem to be aware that these dinners put a serious strain on me financially. I protest sometimes, but I'm tired of being the grumpy downer complaining about money. What's even more frustrating is the fact that they see themselves as caring people but seem unwilling to do anything to back that up, including supporting me emotionally, logistically, or financially in the nonprofit startup I founded. It would be sad to lose those friendships. I've been friends with these guys for literally half of my life, but their lack of support for me and my work has made me question why I'm still bothering to stay friends with them. In college, the fact that we shared so little in common was appealing. Now it's maddening. Should I ditch these guys and try to make friends with more like-minded people? If I do that, won't I just be stuck in a bubble? Sincerely, Grumpy and Gowanus.
So I thought of you for this question, Ali, in part. So we get different questions, and we like to try to, if possible, pair them with people we think might have just some personal resonance with the dilemma. But I thought of you because, as we mentioned earlier, you grew up in a family that your parents are both prominent dissidents. They've had at points in their life serious death threats against them. You have been instilled with a real passion for social justice that courses through you and that you deeply care about, and you particularly care, obviously, about social justice in your home, right? And I imagine that it's been hard, particularly with your American friends who are so detached from Pakistan, to like get them to care like deeply about the stuff that you care about and write about and sing about. And so that was just like one layer that I was thinking maybe we could start off, just like what it's like caring really deeply about social justice and like just being around people who may not. Like, how do you deal with that? Because it's not like all your friends are activists. Plenty of your friends aren't activists. Some of your friends are somewhat apolitical. How do you deal with that?
You know, Sam, I'm going to have to counter that with actually, I appreciate the question and how you framed it. Paradoxically, my experience has been in some ways the opposite.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, my friends in America are people like you and your wife, Sasha, and a bunch of other friends who are non-South Asian or not, migrants from a culture of the global South. And I think I'm friends with those people precisely because I share a sort of language of, if not protest, then certainly of introspection and of searching and of a critical sort of language with those friends, whether it be in the realm of literature and the arts or whether it be about history and politics and about society. So my white American friends are happily not people who, don't get where I'm coming from or who are not interested in where I'm coming from.
But you had some, like, for example, tech bros in college that you still keep up with, right? I mean, it's not like all of your friends are.
Yeah, can we say who my college friends were on this podcast, or are we going to get shut down
it's
on
up
the?
To you.
Yeah, I mean, some of my
friends are ruling the world right now.
That's right. My college friends are ruling the world right now. Some of my college friends are the people who created Facebook and then went on to run it, and also Google and WhatsApp and Instagram. So yes, which is all the same now. Yeah. But I know people who work in tech in Palo Alto. I know people who are trying to create startups in Pakistan. I know people who are activists who work for what we call NGOs, non-government organizations, which are basically non-profits inside Pakistan. I also know people who are self-styled non-profits themselves and exist entirely on Twitter as a sort of series of outrageous sort of remarks. I think because of what I do, because I, again, am suspicious of people who deal purely in ideas or only in rhetoric, I find that my engagement with people and my appreciation or my ability to connect with a person is no longer premised on or determined by these very conventional demographic boundaries. First of all, age. I find that some of my greatest relationships are people who are much older than me, sometimes in their 60s and 70s and 80s, Again, I think that's because of the nature of what I do. I just have to interact with older people because they're the repositories of all the wonderful things that I love.
Yeah. All the therapists that are like the wise therapists that I study with are all way older than me. So I talk to a lot of older people.
I have no old friends. I wish I did.
I think also, with people who have very different professions from mine, I can sometimes have connections that are really profound. We can connect on something or find something that we share or find something that we're both curious about or whatever. But what I hear in this advice question that you asked, is I think it is entirely possible, and in fact happens too often, that people who either are born into or acquire a lot of privilege will not be mindful or not be able to empathize with people who don't have those privileges. And I think it's something that applies beyond the realm of job distinction or even earning power, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it can happen in the realm of, I mean, you can be friends with someone who is coming from a different neighborhood, you know, or who's had a very different political experience, or who's, you know, has a very different sense of who they are in respect to the city that you both live in. And I think the one thing that that would sort of signal to me that this friend is a keeper and this friend is not is curiosity. I think even empathy is something that we all stress these days, but empathy is not so easily arrived at. I think it's something that has to be worked towards.
That's a great point. Actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking like one of my favorite friends is like works at the most corporate kind of, sort of ruthlessly capitalistic job, but he's an incredibly curious, incredibly open-minded, incredibly empathic person, and incredibly sensitive and mindful, and doesn't do stuff like, invite everyone to the most expensive restaurant and expect everyone to
then you should pay for it, right? If you're inviting everybody to an expensive
right.
restaurant.
Right. And I mean, that should be part of the mindfulness of like, if you really want to go to that restaurant, just be aware that like splitting a tab where each person has to pay $250 might not be easy for the nonprofit guy. But anyway, so I think you're right to point out that, that what really matters is sort of curiosity, openness, empathy. But I think this guy, it sounds like that's not the kind of friends that he has right now.
Sometimes we get a little bit of criticism or pushback about like how deep do you want to psychoanalyze someone, but I can't help it. And where I went with this question was about the issue of asking, I guess is what it made me think of, because he talks a lot about wanting to be seen, but less, and I'm choosing to view this as intentionally less about asking to be seen.
Yeah.
And which is a very vulnerable thing to do and a hard thing for me to do in my own life. When I write something and it's published, I never really, it's very uncomfortable for me to like send out the link to my friends and be like, hey, I wrote this and expect anyone to read that. I just sort of like, I think I cope with that discomfort by being like, oh, it doesn't matter, right? I'm not writing it for my friends. I'm writing it for the world. So I don't need my friends to read it.
Right. That's just an ego rush that I'm looking for. You justify it that way. Like, I don't need that ego rush.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't need, why should I need like my friends to read this? It's not for them. But really, I do. Like, what I need is to feel loved and supported and cared for, and people are interested in me. And I'm just hearing, not to make my issues your issues, Grumpy and Gowanus, but I'm hearing something of that in this. Like, you've devoted your life to something that must feed you on multiple levels. Social justice work. Nobody does that superficially, right? It's a commitment, especially if
nobody does it in the long term.
Yes, true, fair.
I think
fair.
plenty of people do it in short term.
Absolutely, it is. I guess if it's real, when I think of like real social justice work, I don't think of that as superficial, right? And if it's a nonprofit, all the more so, because you're getting less. You're not getting financially compensated for it. So there's something about it that really draws you, and yet not feeling seen by your friends, right? That's what this whole letter is about.
Can I ask two questions to Grumpy and Gowanus?
Yeah.
One, why are you assuming that friends you made in college, which is such an artificial environment, where kind of this like faux equal atmosphere is enforced by everybody being the same age, everybody living in the same dorms, everybody eating in the same sort of dining halls or whatever, which is nothing like real life that happens right after, right? I mean, surely if you're even 5 years into life after college, you will have realized that college is not a microcosm of the world, right? So why do you feel that you have to keep meeting people who you may have met in this very different context and different environment? Surely, you should meet people that you want to meet, or friends from college that you want to meet. So the first question is, why do you want to meet these friends? Do you want to meet them just because you were friendly with them or lived with them in college? Or do you want to meet them because they offer you other things? I didn't hear that, the element of,
right.
And
presumably, I mean, to give him the benefit of the doubt, he's complaining about the worst qualities of these friends, but presumably, unless he's just a doormat, presumably he still likes.
There are things he likes.
He
about
still
them.
likes hanging out with them on a certain level, and there are aspects of these guys that he still enjoys, and of course, I mean, we've had actually a similar question to this a while ago about sort of dealing with how to deal with a friend who's being a jerk to you. Like, do you just drop the friend, especially if it's an old friend? And I think it's complicated if it's an old friend, because there is something very powerful about just having, 15 years of accumulated experience that you can share with someone, even if, you find their values abhorrent a lot of the time. You still have all these memories in common, and that there's something powerful about that. But I think that there must be something other than just, inertia that is leading this guy to still invest in these friendships.
It's a fair assumption.
And I think and I think it's I don't know. I mean, there's two levels to the question. One is that his friends are just rude about money. But I think the deeper hurt that this guy is experiencing is the fact that he's doing this social justice work, and he feels, I guess maybe the psychoanalyzing kind of track I'm kind of feeling. I think that he feels just unseen. And he wants to be like, yes, he wants money from these guys, but I think he wants them to appreciate like his struggle and the work that he's doing. And, like, I'm not sure he needs like, them all to be like top donors to this thing.
I would imagine if his friends were going to support his nonprofit, it would be saying, we care about you and we care about what's important to you. And so, we want to support you.
Yeah. But here's the other tricky thing about this. I feel like with your articles, like that's like a quick thing to just be like, hey, I wrote this article. Can you spend 5 minutes and read it? And
very uncomfortable.
And
for
then
me
somebody
to do.
could send, and even that's uncomfortable. But this is a guy who is. What's tricky about this is that when you work in nonprofit social justice work and all of your friends are just like selfish corporate tech bros who don't care about social justice.
Yeah.
It gets into this tricky territory of like, are you being morally superior if you talk about your work? Like, are you casting an implicit judgment on their values as being shallow, that they went and pursued wealth rather than social justice? And it gets into all this like potentially guilting territory. And there's a part of me that just feels like, this guy just kind of needs to embrace the fact that like social justice is a lonely road. And, it's tough, and you can't just expect like most people to appreciate, and applaud the stuff that you're doing, even some of your old friends. And maybe that's an argument for what Ali is getting at. It's like he really just, like he needs to surround himself with more people who are on that lonely road.
I'm thinking in like really sort of subtly glowy terms about the culture that I come from, because I do feel like an immigrant to America, which is something I am, I suppose. Americans talk too much about things. They over-talk things. Mm-hmm. I don't think talk is the solution to everything. It is very helpful and it's very important to talk about things and to articulate things. But I think this license and this entitlement to talk all the time, and this idea that like things are not real until they're talked about, or they don't exist, or it's not possible to be, or that something can't register unless it's talked about endlessly between people. I see this all the time in restaurants and coffee shops, like on the radio, is that people are just, like talking it out over and over and over again. And sometimes it just expresses a kind of selfishness and a kind of, it's self-referential. It's like, validate the I in me, validate me. I am so important here. I need you to validate me more. And it's like, we can only be friends if your I and my I are like, wedged together in a place where neither is like feeling. I mean, I come from a culture where I have seen people have and sustain very deep, profound friendships, relationships, marriages over decades without necessarily talking about how they feel underrepresented in a relationship. And yet working out that conflict or working out their differences through a third relationship through, an enterprise, something that they do together or an activity that they do together. Like, like my grandmother has a whole host of friends who come from different religious sects, who sort of have different, professional backgrounds, social class backgrounds, etc. But they're friends because they play bridge together. I know musicians who are friends to other musicians who they would consider infidels or profligates or beyond the pale in so many ways, and yet the music allows them to come together. And there's this understanding that in the realm of, in that shared space, we will not broach, verbally the things that make us feel different from one another. Now, I know that that's different from you feeling put upon by somebody else, right? Which I think if a rich friend invites you to a restaurant and insists that you all go Dutch or whatever,
yeah,
this is not okay. I don't think that's okay. But I think what I'm hearing a little bit of is this idea that this person may want to be validated by these friends, and I think expecting friends who very obviously didn't choose that path to validate that, what can they do? You can't force somebody to invest in your nonprofit or to give you money for your activity. I don't think that's necessarily fair. And if you want them to ask you about what you're doing, why don't you tell them about what you're doing? Or create that, maybe ask them to come with you to an activity or a museum exhibit or a talk that addresses some of your very deeply held beliefs.
There's a real risk though that and I imagine possibly Grumpy and Gowanus has told them, and maybe they don't care. And
I'm thinking about just this question just reminded me, I don't know, I'm sure you both get emails from friends who are like, hey, I'm on the advisory board for this thing, or I'm, this nonprofit I care about is doing this thing, and we need some money. And if it's not my thing, I'm just kind of well, that's nice that they're doing that. I never even think they're actually asking me for anything. And I'm a little embarrassed reading this question to think about what it feels like to be the friend who is sending it to everyone.
But is that grounds enough for
to
thinking that your friend is a bad friend?
No.
Right.
And honestly, for me, if I engaged in some way, maybe I would care. If I knew how it affected me, I think the meaning in the personal meaning for me and the meaning in the relationship would change how I felt. If I knew they were sending it because they wanted to feel cared for by me, honestly, I would give money then. I do care, and if that's how you need this from me, that's much more compelling than give it because this is an important thing,
Yeah, I got an email from someone who was doing a run for cancer or something like that, and this week, and I didn't give because I was just
it's not my issue.
I care about cancer. It's a really important thing. We should donate to cure cancer, of course. But it just felt like this is a transactional thing where he's just sending out. I don't know, where he just wants something transactional from me rather than something that I don't know, that's more like a reflection of the fact that we have a relationship to one another, that I care about the issues that he's passionate about. So,
right.
I don't
if
know,
it was I'm running this because of my father and this blah blah blah. I don't know, not to blah 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 that, but if I felt the meaning for him, then it would move me and I'd probably give. But if it's just it's for cancer, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do we have a little bit of time? Can I just ask a sort of apparently tangential but not really tangential question related to this, which is that as somebody who grew up as quite a bit of a loner, I had this very busy, hectic social life where I was, had a lot of friends, but I had also, for various reasons, this very private, personal sort of dream life of my own. And I think my being in the arts, as I think it applies to everybody across the board who seeks a life in the arts, is that the part of you that makes art is mostly coming from a place of solitude or a place that loves solitude or seeks it out or feels comfortable with solitude. A little bit of what I'm hearing here, and I hope I'm not reading too far into it, is the culture of tribes, of packs and tribes, which I think is a real incubator of toxic masculinity. I'm sorry, I know this is not about toxic masculinity, but it's related to the culture of toxic masculinity, because I think first of all, to assume that because you were together in a place like college, you will continue to be together, or that formation has to hold somehow. I wonder about that. Why is that something that we should assume? I mean, I hear too often people sort of treating it like a kind of moral thing. Oh, that person doesn't stay in touch, or like didn't stay in touch, or like, but staying in touch is like a morally superior or
It is
good.
funny that like it's considered moral to stay in touch, even if you don't like someone.
Like I will often, because I'm traveling or living between continents, it'll happen that I'm meeting a friend after a year or like after 2 years. And I have found that it will be possible to like pick up from where we left off.
I love relationships like that.
I love relationships, and I actually seek and cherish relationships like that. Relationships where I don't feel that there's this constant like balance sheet that is on display. I mean, there are friendships in which that require more work, and sometimes those relationships are absolutely worth the work that you put into them. But I think just assuming, almost as though you've derived from the culture of groups and of social formations, that you just have to stick with your social formation, because if you lose your college friends, or like are not able to repeatedly see them, then you're like, it says something about your success as a social being or something. Like I would caution against that. Like I don't think that as adults we should just assume that because we happen to share a playground with somebody, which was not a context of our choosing, which was not a setting of our choosing, where we made friends before we were fully formed, etc. And I think college is like that too. A lot of people who are at college are not yet in complete possession of their characters, they haven't yet made the profound choices or decisions about their life, about, as we can see from this, what the career path that you take says something about who you've decided to be, etc.
Yeah.
I think if there's those divergences on view, and if you feel that it's causing you strife and it's causing you pain, maybe see them less, or like see them in situations where it's not an expensive restaurant. Like maybe it's like see them in some other space.
I do wonder if there's a kind of subtle feeling of dependence on these people, right? And it's like if you were less dependent, if you had these other relationships that felt more right, would this bother you as much? Right. Probably not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about in my own life, like some of my older friends, not older, because as I said before, I don't have any old friends, sadly. Some of my friends that I've been in friendships with for the longest, who I have drifted apart from in terms of, I mean, the most clear way I think would be like some of my friends who are just in the really interested in making a lot of money, right? And that is something that I mean, I'm human. I also want to make a lot of money. I think very few people
Your choices don't reflect that.
But I've chosen incredibly low net worth careers because I find them more interesting. I've made the choice that like I care more about finding work that's interesting than finding work that's remunerative, and I think in times of insecurity where I feel bad about myself, I get superior and I'm like, oh, like I have better values and like my life is better and fuck these guys, right? And then in times like now where I'm in a pretty good place now I'm actually able to hang out with those guys, and it's a really interesting experience for me because I don't feel superior to them. I feel different from them, right? And I actually look at them and I'm like, sometimes I think like, so I guess you could say an anti-capitalist, right? Like I think capitalism is problematic, whatever, right? And some of my friends who are just total capitalists and materialists, I actually find it interesting to hang out with them in a non-judgmental way and just look at their lives, and I'm like, oh, this is what it's like to not have a problem with capitalism or materialism, and like that's kind of nice to see that they enjoy their fine things and enjoy the game of competition, and like I don't think I could ever get to the point where I could enjoy that more than like writing fiction or whatever, but like it's kind of nice that like they've found a way to enjoy doing that stuff and be happy doing that stuff. In my bitter times, I'm like, there's no way they could be happy. Like, they're clearly just deluding themselves, and
Yeah. So when you're less triggered, you're more likely to be like open to people, right? Like
yeah. But I also, I also think like if my only friends that I hung out with were capitalists, who were really interested in like accumulation, and I had no friends who were interested in like literature and social justice.
You need to feel like the parts you like about yourself are seen in others, right? I mean,
yeah, and I think it's easier to
seen by others.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah, and I think it's easier sometimes when you're hanging out with like-minded people. He ended to be seen. He ended with that question, will I just be in a bubble? Like, I think about this also with my meditation practice. Like, I actually don't have that many friends who meditate, but the few I do, I like really try to keep up with them, because honestly, it's a really difficult practice. And I'm not talking about sitting on the cushion. That part is difficult, but the really difficult part is like trying to be mindful in your day-to-day life, which is nearly impossible. And it's exhausting, and it feels lonely to not be able to talk about that and to use the kind of specific terminology of people who like understand what meditation is on a deeper level. So I really cherish those friendships, and I do try to keep up with them, because it's lonely to exist in a world full of non-meditators when this is a really important thing to me. So I think like you need to have some people in your bubble. Like, he needs to have some people in the social justice world who can specifically empathize with the kind of stuff he's going through, because I guarantee it, those other friends can like intellectually conceive of like, oh, it's a hard, lonely road to be a nonprofit social justice activist, but they have no idea what his life is like.
I really do think, just especially in my experience as a therapist, that shame emerges from loneliness and isolation. If you feel alone, it's natural to ask the question, well, what's wrong with me that I'm alone? That how did I find myself here? It must be because there's something wrong with me. So to undo that and to find connections that affirm you, and that where you will feel seen and have that special resonance that comes with that kind of friendship where you're on the same wavelength. I think this person needs that.
Yeah. But you know what? To get to Ali's early point, I know we try not to give advice, and of course we always end up giving advice, but I feel like this listener would be upset if we didn't address probably what I imagine stepping inside his shoes is actually one of the most important questions, which is how can he actually get his friends to donate to his nonprofit?
Yeah. Oh, is that the question?
I actually wonder, but go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I mean, if the like the agenda here is to get your friends to come around more to who you are and to accommodate your life more and your reality more.
Although he's not even saying that. He kind of wants them to just be more like him, I think, rather than just appreciate him. But go on.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm rereading it. Well, go ahead while I read it, and I'll decide.
Yeah, I mean, if it's about just being more, if you want to be heard more or seen more, I think maybe humor is a good way to go about it. Write your friends a funny group email and say, hey guys, the last time we hung out, the bill was this, and it's great when you're earning X $100,000 million a year, but like when you're not, like me, it may make more sense to go and hang out at X place or Y place, so maybe next time we can all go to the free
subway.
To the subway, or that's really mean. Or maybe we can all just go to the Met Museum if you're in New York, or go and have lunch at
Met Museum is a beautiful suggestion. The rich people can pay $50,
exactly,
and he can pay 5 cents.
Exactly, and they can be surrounded by grandeur and thought-provoking stuff from all cultures of the world. And it's a great place to talk about nonprofits.
So this is the part you're referring to, Sam. It says, what's even more frustrating is the fact that they see themselves as caring people, but seem unwilling to do anything to back that up, including supporting me emotionally, logistically, or financially in the nonprofit startup I founded. And I guess it's like, I'm just going to highlight and underline supporting me, right? It could be financially, but it's also emotionally, logistically.
He does list emotionally as an option. So I guess he is saying, the fact that he lists that as an option is saying that if they supported him emotionally, that that might be enough, even if they don't want to lend a hand with his nonprofit. But I guess I wonder, like, I don't know, a lot of what we talk about on this show is like, how can men directly address other men? Because I think women
it
have
would
a much
really
easier
mean
time.
a lot to me
Yeah,
if you blah.
Right. Like
Right.
Sasha, my wife, who Ali knows, like, has a much easier time just saying something like that to one of her female friends who's hurt her. It would really mean a lot to me if you
That's it.
you
I
know.
mean, just to be clear, this is why I don't like to send. I don't like to say it would really mean a lot to me. That's hard for me. It's uncomfortable. So when I don't email people like, "Hey, I wrote this thing," it's because I don't want to say that.
because it's admitting weakness, which is admitting, like, you know, quote unquote effeminacy. To be
I mean,
like,
I'm poking fun at
I'm-
myself because
yeah.
obviously I don't like this about myself, and I wish I could open-heartedly tell people what I care about, including the fact that I made something. So I would encourage this person not to be like me and maybe open up. If it means a lot to you that your friends support your nonprofit, I would really give that thought. It seems like, is that really necessary? But if you land on that's important to you, then say it. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I wonder what would satisfy him though. Like
Well,
what-
like $50, $100,
well, I mean,
an
he's
endowment.
saying emotionally, but I wonder, like, is that like, what does that look like? A token, like, because here's I'm imagining this play out. Like, if he writes them a wholehearted email being like, you know, guys, like, I feel like it's a lonely road working on this nonprofit. I'm struggling financially. The work I do is really important, but I feel like I don't get enough sort of recognition or support or appreciation for this hard work that I'm doing. It would mean a lot if, like, you guys could just, like, give me a little boost or whatever. Then like, I could see some of them being like, that's so soft, like, and making fun of you. Some of them would be nice and be like, oh, okay, like, I hear that, and I'm really proud of you for doing this work. And then they just, like, I imagine, like, that they give that little token gesture,
But
and then
then,
just
like,
go back
would-
to not giving a shit.
I
And I
mean-
think that's, I guess, part of what I just come to like the conclusion of, like, I kind of think the realistic thing here is that, like, he has to be comfortable with the fact that these other people are not going to give a shit about his nonprofit in the way that he wants them to. I wrote a novel. I would have loved if every person I care about read it and told me that it meant a lot to them, but I had to get comfortable with the fact a lot of people don't give a shit about books at all. Some people do give a shit about books and didn't give enough of a shit to read my book. And I can't go around feeling like just perennially frustrated that, like, this thing that I cared about and worked on, other people didn't care about. You know, I can't live my life that way.
What do you think, Ali?
I agree. I've been through that experience so many times myself, so I know all about that. The experience of making something or pursuing something that your peers may not care about. And I am very comfortable with that. In fact, I like it that way. And I really resent it when I have to sort of, appear to fit in with my peers in any given context just because we all were together once and are, like, supposed to be like identical units in some, like, larger scheme. And now we have to replicate that feeling all over again. What for? I don't know.
Also,
and I
like,
actually keep friends, and I'm in touch with friends who kind of harbor some kind of eccentricity or something that makes them feel quirky and singular.
yeah.
And I think those are the reasons that I'm actually friends with most of my friends, is because I feel at some level we all have a sort of spiritual connection that comes from knowing that,
Mhm.
what it is to work in by yourself, to be on your own,
If we flip this around, like, Grumpy and Gowanus, like, do you give a shit about, like, your friend's hedge fund? You know what I mean? Like, you don't care at all. Nobody does. Like, if their hedge fund is going under, you're not like, oh, let me bail out the hedge fund, or, like, even that would never
Right.
even occur to you, right? We don't, like,
or like even giving
actually-
moral support to your friends for running their hedge
Yes.
fund, right?
No,
Yeah.
and actually, that's a great
And maybe
point.
they need it.
So the comical, so the caricature version is like, do you give a shit about your friend's hedge fund? And of course he doesn't. But, like, do you ever stop to truly do the thought experiment of, like, thinking about your friend who works at the hedge fund on a day where all of the bets that he made went south, and he's feeling unbelievable stress and terror that he's going to be fired, and that the standard of living that, you know, he's been at could be completely upended. Like, probably not. You probably are like, oh, first world problem. Oh, like, who gives a shit?
I also just want to be clear, like, you know, I'm saying that not to like shame you, but more to just point out, I think you're sort of displacing your anxiety about your work. Sorry to psychoanalyze again, but it's just kind of what I do. But, you know, like, if your nonprofit is struggling, if you're financially stressed about it, you're looking to your friends to solve that problem. And that's really something that actually none of us would really do if we, you know, and that's sort of, so I would, if for concrete advice, like, you do need to solve that problem. Like, it's telling you that it's very stressful for you, but this is not something to put on your friends.
There's a lot more we could talk about, but let's end.
I also, because I feel like we sort of landed in a slightly harsh note towards this person. And I guess I would just say, like, I think it's great that this is the work that you found something that calls to you, that you're doing it. I'm sorry. I know that it's always stressful even when it's successful. So I'm sorry that, you know, there's financial stress going along with the work that you're doing, because that's just one of the great injustices of the world, that the people who do the work that we all need get compensated so little for it.
Often the worst compensated are the most important.
So I genuinely, like, I'm sorry that that's your situation, and maybe one of the ways to take care of yourself is to find other relationships where you feel supported. And these friends, it's okay that these friends aren't that source of support for you. You really owe it to yourself to find that support, since what you're doing is hard.
I agree. And, you know, and also, like, I can say that I don't know Grumpy and Go Honest, but I'm maybe proud is a weird word to use for someone you don't know, but I feel like admiration that he's sticking out, you know, and sticking it out on this path and dealing with, like, the indignities of having to, you know, not afford the bill, but staying true to his values. So, like, we appreciate you, Grumpy and Go Honest. If you want to be friends with us, give us a call.
I don't really know you, but
Ali, do you have a quote or a gem of wisdom that you heard in your life, or that somebody shared with you that you return to over and over, that you find particularly valuable? Could be two if you can't pick just one.
I think it is that thing that I kind of started with, that couplet. I think it's a 19th century Urdu poem that says, "Step out of the workshop of the mind and step into the tavern of love." You know, sometimes I think just surrendering control and allowing an emotional experience to take you somewhere, to a place of truth, is a much more helpful way of resolving conflict, of overcoming fear, of dealing with the challenge, than trying to conquer it or control it through what you think is your knowledge or your rationality or your mind, you know. And I think that tavern of love actually usually is a metaphor for relationships. I think human relationships and human interactions that are meaningful are the key to peace. And that's what I'm telling myself every day these days.
Where can people find you? Your YouTube videos, your social media stuff.
They can find my YouTube videos on YouTube, where they can just type my name and see quite a few of my videos, or they can subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Ali Sethi Official, ALISETHI Official, or they can follow me on Instagram, where I post all kinds of crazy things,
including his very cool outfits. Ali is an exceptional
my silly outfits.
Sartorialist.
It's my Instagram handle is also Ali Sethi Official. I regret the official because it makes me sound like an official. I wish there had been Ali Sethi here or Ali Sethi now or something, but like those are now taken.
Is there some troll who has like an unofficial?
No, I think there's just a lot of South Asians in the world, so I think that's why the name gets used.
Right.
All right, everyone, that's it for our show this week. If you have a question, you can send it to us at heymanpod@gmail.com, or better yet, give us a call. Leave a voicemail at 917-426-4326. You can find us on Instagram or Twitter at heymanpod. And if you have a second, leave us a review, please. Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts. We love them. Thanks.